So you even see, for example, there's some clips floating around of these Christian evangelical pastors, like in those mega churches in the American South, talking about Turkey, and it's like, how all of a sudden have they created Turkey out to be, the next existential threat out of nowhere? And I do find this is where I feel like it's more coordinated than we give it credit.
So, as if Israel didn't already have enough on its plate, it's already fighting in Lebanon. It's basically in a very shaky ceasefire with Iran, and it's already picking a new fight with another country, this time a NATO power, Turkey. And it's a little crazy because Turkey is not only a NATO power, but it has nukes, it has a modern military, and yet Israeli politicians at the highest levels are threatening it, and Turkey is answering back. I'm Borzu Dergahi. Welcome to my podcast. It's called Badlands. You can find it at borzu.substack.com. And I am here today with Sophie Fullerton. She is a political scientist, I believe it is, a lecturer at Fordham University, lives in Istanbul and New York City, and is a frequent commentator on U.S. and Turkish relations. Her social media posts caught my attention, saying some smart, kind of spicy things about the Israeli attempts to provoke Turkey. I don't understand it. And meanwhile, there are, of course, U.S. politicians who are doing Israel's bidding and kind of repeating some of these lines. Turkey needs to be brought in line. Turkey is next, which would be a rather cataclysmic war, especially for us, like me and Sophie, who spent a significant amount of time here in Turkey. Sophie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
When did you first start noticing this heated battle of rhetoric between Israel and Turkey, and what do you make of it?
Well, it definitely seemed that all of this sudden, almost overnight in a sense, after the regime change attempts by US and Israel within Iran, there seemed to be this coordinated discussion, mainly within social media circles, mainly pro-Israeli circles, that once the Iran project is finished in a sense, then there's a concern that Turkey or Turkiya is going to fill that role of what Iran was in the sense of terror or theocratic oppression within the region. And I think the irony being, someone living here and experiencing Turkey, I've traveled all throughout Turkey. I live here openly as an open Christian. The type of rhetoric that was being stated very much contradicts how life is on the ground here. And so it was almost laughable at the time to even argue on their end that Turkey is turning into this great theocracy that is in tandem with Iran. When you look at on the ground facts, A, that's not true. And B, when you look at how Turkey is set up as a governmental apparatus, it has nothing to do with theocratic overbearings like within Iran. It's more of a constitutionally secular country that's modeled around, the society is modeled around that.
Sure. So what were some of the things that people were saying about Turkey? What were some of the comments that caught your attention from Israeli and pro-Israeli voices?
Yeah, so a lot of it, I would say, are these buzzwords that are really meant to startle people. So you'll see like Islamist or jihadist, these types of words that are meant to bring in a type of rhetoric or narrative that, but and doing that also, it also allows for people to not dig deeper into the actual facts. So if you see the word Islamist or jihadist or, fomenting of jihadism, it freaks people out and it gets them emotional, but it doesn't allow for analytical or critical thinking or even a broader understanding of what's happening on the ground. So I do think this is why I've been arguing it seems very coordinated, because if you look at the type of rhetoric that's being pushed, a lot of it is in line of the same type of wording. So you'll see multiple accounts say the same type of wording or rhetoric meant to stoke this notion of Turkey as being like this Islamist stronghold or this theocratic overbearing society that, again, I'll reiterate again, is not what's happening on the ground here.
What do you think? Is this is this a prelude to a kind of conflict? I remember, for example, after the U.S. invaded, you're probably too young to even remember, but after the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003 and George W. Bush said, mission accomplished, there were voices in Washington said, hey, Iran, you're next. Syria, you're next. They were literally warning that. Do you think that this is something like that? Do you think that there is going to be some kind of U.S. Israeli attempt to provoke a war with Turkey?
I don't think direct military action. I would see more in the lines of Israel trying to foment stuff even diplomatically within Washington to try and create a bridge between U.S. and Turkish relations that have been strong, particularly under this administration. So I can see them doing things like that. What I also find quite interesting too is how these pro-Israeli or strong Zionist rhetoric is trying to foment, I would say, views around Turkey within Christian sects or Christian fundamentalist groups within the US. And what I find really interesting about that is they're smart in the sense of understanding that, particularly under the Trump administration, the US evangelical or the American fundamentalist Christian demographic has such strong sway and influence over conservative politics, particularly this administration. So what you start to see too is this type of rhetoric where Turkey is not safe for Christians, or Turkey is targeting Christians. And what I find really interesting about that is it seems like it's targeting the specific demographics within the US that doesn't have a broad understanding of what's happening within Turkey at an attempt to try and influence evangelical Christian fundamentalist groups to sway the administration in a negative light with Turkey. So you even see, for example, there's some clips floating around of these Christian evangelical pastors, like in those mega churches in the American South, talking about Turkey. And it's like, how all of a sudden have they created Turkey out to be the next existential threat out of nowhere? And I do find this is where I feel like it's more coordinated than we give it credit.
Despite a lot of the rhetoric from Erdogan about Israel, Israel is still getting its jet fuel for its fighter jets through Turkey. It's still coming from Azerbaijan through Turkey. And if Turkey really wanted to mess with Israel, it could cut off that flow. I mean, is that something that you've ever looked at, and the trade relations between Turkey and Israel, despite the rhetoric?
Again, like what I keep reiterating, on the ground is so different than the type of rhetoric that's coming. So even last week, we had that attempted terrorist attack on the Israeli consulate, and you see Turkish authorities really go and stop this. And
Wait,
again,
for listeners who don't know about it, could you just briefly describe what happened there?
yeah, so there were a few gunmen. I think they were coming from Izmit, a neighboring city, and they, I believe, had relations with radical movements, and they attempted to storm the Israeli consulate and do some type of targeted attack, terrorist attack against the Israeli consulate. It was immediately
just
stopped.
to be clear, the consulate is not like some little building. It's in like an office tower type of structure in Istanbul. It's not like it's kind of a pretty fortified high-rise building, and they've got like a floor or something like that in that building.
And from my understanding, too, no one was in the consulate. So it was empty, but there was still an attempt for them to try and breach it and do some type of mass terrorist attack. And it was immediately stopped by the Turkish police. And it just is so interesting to see that, I think that these incidents deserve credence or credibility because it shows again that the type of rhetoric is not falling in line with how Turkey is doing diplomatic or any type of relations with Israel. So again, I keep reiterating within my social media too that during times like this, when heightened rhetoric and emotion is at its height, it's really important for us to move beyond the emotion or the heightened type of wording and look at what's happening with on the ground, or look diplomacy wise, or look at the policy, these types of things that really go against the type of disinformation we're seeing coming out of these Israeli circles.
What is the reality? We see the rhetoric. It's these two Middle East powers kind of yelling at each other over who's the biggest kid on the block. But what's in your assessment, what is the empirical reality?
So I focus on disinformation a lot. And with disinformation, what you need to do is remove the emotion of the politics and really look at the on the ground realities. And what the on the ground realities is that Israel needs an existential threat to continue to justify its types of regional crimes to its domestic population, but also to the US, for example. So there is definitely a need for Israel to continue to have this type of existential threat. Turkey is able to fit that role because it's also a regional power within this region. They have influence within Syria. They're continuing to broaden out their influence, and for Israel and Israel's broader project within the region, that cannot go. So Israel does not want a competing powerhouse within the region. So when looking at the disinformation, you need to look at why a country is wanting to create a type of rhetoric or narrative out of thin air. And when you look at Israel's regional interests, Turkey fits the line as to why Turkey is on the next chopping block for this type of rhetoric we're seeing.
Also, Turkey, though, I mean, it takes two to tango. They could de-escalate, they could cool things down, but it doesn't seem like Turkey is interested in cooling things down. Is there a game that Turkey is playing as well? Can Turkey use an enemy or faux enemy like Israel as well? What do you think?
Well, so I see it a bit differently in the sense that it seems like Turkey has really been trying to stabilize things, so especially after Syria. So after the Syrian conflict ended, it was almost positive for Turkey in the sense because a lot of Syrian
Very
refugees were
positive.
going
Yeah.
back. So it allowed for Turkey's immigration problems to be less. There was also a concern too that if the Iranian regime fell, then would Turkey then be the next to take in these refugees. So Turkey always has become, I would say, a safe house for different types of peoples and populations for when we see different conflicts or instability within the region. Turkey has continued to be a stabilizing force. So I would argue almost the latter in the sense that it doesn't benefit Turkey to do anything that would continue to get Israel's wants or desires per se. I would say that the one that benefits the most with destabilization within the region is Israel, because
Sure.
Israel has been operating as an expansive regionalist force within the region.
I see a kind of little bit of a difference between like major public support for Iran and kind of opposition to the U.S. war. Meanwhile, Turkey, a NATO power, hosting a couple of U.S. bases, one a very large U.S. base, have the government having to play more of a balancing act. What do you see? How do you see it?
It's interesting to see how sentiments on the ground here change relating to how people view the US per se. So, for example, when Trump was first getting into office, there seemed to be more of a stronger pro-Trump sentiment within Turkish populations, that they were more.
Are you talking 2017 or 2020?
Oh, sorry. 20, the recent one,
Okay,
or most
2025.
recent. Yeah, 2025, where it seemed that people were excited about Trump, particularly after Biden's failed policies within the region with Gaza per se. So they were looking for something fresh and new. And I really do believe that the idea of Trump 1.0 within the region was very much on people's minds of how he operated within the region. Now there seems to be a strong shift where you talk to people and they're very much like, what is the US doing? This is not who we remember as Trump. There's a lot of questions and confusions of how the US is operating because it seems so contradictory to how people once viewed US foreign policy per se.
And what, if anything, are you picking up, just even from friends and people around, about public sentiment about the war next door? Are they opposed? Are they supportive? Are they confused?
I would say it's the confusion the most, that they don't really understand US end goals. And I would argue too, it's the same with Americans. I mean, if you poll Americans within the US, could they say that there's a strong narrative to be had as to what we're doing within the region right now? And so I would say that there's almost like this collective confusion of what's happening, and a concern that how Trump continues to go more and more erratic, what this means for the globe moving forward, because it just seems that we have 33 or 32 more months of this administration, that the amount of I would call it a destruction he's posing has I don't see how this can continue for this long.
And what are you seeing? You're here on the ground. You go to the US probably a little bit more frequently than I do. What are you seeing in terms of like prices and costs? Are people feeling the impact of the conflict in Turkey in terms of rising prices? Are people blaming anyone at this point? Is there a awareness that that the war is causing these rising prices, or are people just frustrated and angry?
It's interesting to me. So I go to London a lot, and usually from Istanbul to London the tickets are like 40 to $70. I saw a ticket for 300 US dollars to go from London to Istanbul, and that I would say was the first personal shock I saw, because it feels like things are just so extreme, and I hope that there's some type of stabilizing force within the US government per se, to where we get back to a sense of normalcy, because it just, like I said previously, it feels like this can't continue for 32 more months, because it really, Trump has caused so much damage within the US domestically, and then you see also this domino effect of damage within the region now.
And if I may ask, what, if anything, are you working on now in terms of research or doctoral thesis, if anything? What is your personal project at this point?
So it's interesting. So I started off around Syria. So that's how I ended up within Istanbul, working around disinformation around Syria before the removal of the Assad regime. And so I right now I teach actually mainly on American politics, which is a great irony, because I started off within Middle Eastern politics, and now it's so interesting to see a lot of the things that I've learned and studied and taught on within the Middle Eastern region happening within our own country per se. So right now, a lot of my classes and work focus on democratic backsliding within the U.S. And it's a bit, I would say, a bit of a heartbreaking thing, and very sobering, to bring a lot of this research and work back home.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It's been such a pleasure speaking.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Borzu Deragahi. This is the Badlands Podcast. Please subscribe. It's at borzu.substack.com.